Hi, I am Vasant Chari. I am the Director for Human Connected Design at Connected Places Catapult, which means that I'm lucky enough to work with all of the people at the Catapult who really deeply try to understand how people do things, how people use the transport that they use to get to the places they need to be and live in the cities that they live in. I'm joined by an illustrious panel, which I'm going to ask to introduce themselves. I think those of you who are in the rail conversation, we're going to try and take a slightly broader view, but I'd like you to bring as much that you learned from that session here as possible. Maybe just to start and to link to some of the conversations we had earlier today, I'm going to quote Lucy Musgrove, who was doing one of the keynotes. She said two things to me just outside before. The first was that she was really, really fed up with meeting people in this sector who said things like, oh, inclusive innovation, my daughter really cares about that, or I have a friend who is a disabled person and they really think this is important, but then not seeing any action in this space. And the second thing that she said to me was that it's really, really difficult to have this sort of uncomfortable conversation in a progressive and joyous way. So I'm going to try my very best to have a really uncomfortable conversation in a progressive and joyous way by first asking our panelists to say, who are you, what sort of organization are you from, and how do you approach the question of inclusive innovation? And then we're going to try and move as quickly as possible to how do we get some action in this space, how do we get some investment in this space, making it clear that when we talk about investment, it's not just cash. This is also energy, cooperation, this sort of thing. So, who's with me today, and how do you approach this subject? And if you'd like a mic, I will pass it along.
Is everyone in the right room? That was the first thought. My name is Joanne Anderson. I used to be Mayor of Liverpool from May 21 to May 23, but my background is as an equality, diversity and inclusion consultant, and I've also been a civil servant working for the Crown Prosecution Service on community engagement. So being inclusive comes naturally to me in whatever I do and how I make things up. How I start off in my thoughts, whether it's policy, whether it's something more practical, but being inclusive and thinking how it works for the end user is something that comes natural to me. A great piece of work that was done in Liverpool was around safer cities, and the bids have been put in by the Police and Crime Commissioner. It was in partnership with the council and some other organisations. But when we surveyed women how they feel on public transport in the city, 52% felt unsafe at night, and more surprisingly, 42% felt unsafe in the day. And some of the small actions that have been taken since then in terms of the use of technology, training people up to be guardians, communicating, educating people, has made a real difference to how women feel in the city, and that's just one example. Something that's transferable is where I work on is around social investment. Social investment doesn't really work for the social trading organisations who want to access the money. It's often on terms that's not agreeable to them. We've co-designed the financial products in Liverpool with an organisation called Kindred around social investment, and from that we've had a massive take-up of investment. 50% have been women, 25% have been black-led organisations, statistics that other people can't tend to meet by thinking of, by designing the solution with the people it affects.
Thank you. I think I've got a mic. Is that working? Yes, lovely. Thanks, John. I'm Caroline Stickland. I'm the Chief Executive of Transport for All. We're the disabled-led group working on access to public transport, private transport and street space for the 16 million disabled people who live across the UK. Inclusive transport, inclusive innovation is very much our day-to-day. Just wanted to sort of start by challenging some preconceptions we might have about who is in the disabled community. So when we talk about disabled people, we mean anyone who faces an access barrier because of an impairment or condition, but primarily because of the way that our streets or our transport have been designed and delivered and evaluated, all by a transport sector which frankly is not diverse enough and is not looking outside of its own kind of safe haven bubble. So we need to be aware of the diversity of the communities that we're trying to serve. Only, I think, 8% of disabled people are full-time wheelchair users. So when we're thinking about inclusive innovation, are we thinking about the lights? It's very bright in here. Are we thinking about places to stop and rest? Are we thinking about noise? It's very noisy out there. That's why I've been sitting listening to Freeports for an hour, because I couldn't find anywhere quieter than the Freeport section. It's very interesting. And are we thinking about how we integrate innovation across different modes and thinking about journeys rather than modes? So my start of 10 is kind of, think about the diversity of our communities and the diversity within protected characteristics groups. It's not just disabled people need one thing, ethnic minority people need one thing, parents need one thing. It's not like that at all. We're all multifaceted, and if we recognise that we're multifaceted, can't we recognise that our communities are as well? And I suppose that then leads me to like the other bit of inclusive innovation is if you're doing innovation where you're not talking to your end users, then you're not just not doing inclusive innovation, you're potentially doing exclusive innovation, for want of a better word, and you're building in more barriers. So last year, you might remember that there was a really well thought through proposal to close lots of train station ticket offices. And that was in the name of modernisation and innovation. And people thought, oh gosh, we can have a tech solution, we don't need the staff. And actually, without asking people first, what impact is this potentially going to have on you and your journeys, we're modernising, we're digitising, we're doing all these nice icings, but we're actually excluding various service users and various passengers. So I'll stop my rant there and hand on to Selina.
Thank you very much. I'm Selina Mason. I'm Director of Masterplanning at Lendlease. Lendlease is a global real estate organisation. We deliver large-scale urban regeneration projects, several in London and a large one also in Birmingham, where I spend quite a lot of my time at the moment. So I come from, I recognise, a very privileged position in terms of leading the creation of new parts of our cities. And I've learned, I suppose, when I first met all these guys, I talked about myself as a bit of a learner driver, actually, because I think that you never really stop learning about this. I think, the comment Caroline has just made about we're all part of, we have our own characteristics, and I'm very conscious that in some spaces I'm in a minority. I'm a minority person. In other places, I'm not. It depends really on how I'm viewing my situation and how other people view me. And from that perspective, designing a city or a bit of a city is a complex thing. And you learn over the years that you really cannot do enough in the way of listening, researching, learning, talking to people, and also I think probably looking at ourselves much more closely, examining exactly who it is that I am offering the opportunity to help me design the city with. And as Caroline has also just said, we don't have a diverse enough group of people who are designing and engineering our cities by any stretch. And even if, as I do, try to introduce a very diverse bunch of consultants, it's incredibly difficult, particularly when it becomes when we're entering into this highly regulated environment, which is shared public realm, whether that's streets for cycling, walking, trams in the case of Birmingham, trains, etc. You're in a world which is so hidebound, and the chinks in the armour there in terms of sort of working out how on earth you can navigate your way through to be persuasive and actually adjust and change things is really, really hard. So there'll be a really interesting conversation today to work out some of these ways that this can be done. I kind of bang my head against a brick wall, and it's in so many fronts. It's not just the physical environment; it's also the perception of the environment as well. It's talking to, it's issues about. One of my bugbears is a conversation I often have with the police. They're interested in security. I'm interested in safety. I don't think they see a distinction. I absolutely see a distinction. And designing a city for security is very different to designing a city for safety, and this is when you introduce issues about particularly young women and girls on public transport, for instance, or walking on our streets. So there are so many different angles. I'm learning all the time. This conversation, I think I'm hoping to learn even more today. I offer my experiences into that, but yes, I'm very looking forward to hearing a broader conversation.
Yeah. I have a mic, I think. Yes? Okay. I'm Anna Landre. I wear a lot of hats, but today I'm here with the National Centre for Accessible Transport as a board member and the Global Disability Innovation Hub, where I'm doing my PhD. I also work a bit in disaster preparedness and response for disabled people who are often left behind in those situations. And I think when we talk about investment, what I'm most interested in getting across today is that I think maybe even more so than cash, what we need is an investment in expertise and in trust with the disability community and the communities of people, say, in housing or in transport or whatever it might be, who know that they have to start stepping into this space and looking into what they can do to include. Because I think we're all kind of on the same page that we have a moral responsibility to do that, to design for the broadest swath of, human diversity that we can. But I think a lot of times people mean well and don't do it correctly. So for instance, anyone could look at, say, a wheelchair user and intuit that stairs are a problem. But how many people could intuit that you often, when you're going along the pavement, want to stay away from people who are holding a cigarette, because when they're holding it, depending on how tall they are, that cigarette is right at your eye level, your mouth level. That's a very kind of small piece of situated knowledge that you're not going to be able to know. I don't care how long you think really hard and empathize really hard with this experience. And so what I'm often telling people is that with disability, the most important thing to know is that there's a hell of a lot you don't know. And so you have to search for that situated knowledge. You have to search for that expertise, because if you can't, then the things you build are not going to be fit for purpose. And you're wasting not only your own time, but the community's time and resources that were supposed to go towards making disabled people's lives easier and better. And instead, you built something that really doesn't work, that we really didn't want in the first place. And that's just so wasteful, and it introduces mistrust and creates this kind of cycle of bad design when the community you're designing for and supposedly with repeatedly sees you do it wrong. And so then maybe if in the future you do ask, they've already discounted you. They've already said, forget it. Those people don't listen. They're not interested in listening. So I think when we talk about investment, more than just the obvious, I really want to see that investment in trust, in relationships, so that we stop wasting the sparse resources in cash that we already have.
Thank you so much for those introductions. So we've just spoken about the amount of bad design out there, the amount of wasted potential through situated knowledge, and the sheer exclusion that happens across this sector. Where have you seen examples of this being done better than it currently is in general, and what can we learn from those examples? You mentioned Joanne Kindred as one example.
Visiting Copenhagen a few years ago, looking at the around the docks and the water, the buildings weren't very high, which was something that I noticed. The buildings weren't very high generally, so there's obviously a policy in place. But what I noticed about the public spaces in those areas, it very much felt like a forethought, not an afterthought. And I think when we sit in councils and planning decisions and things thought of, we've challenged in Liverpool. There was a cabinet member who had a community accountability forum that helped with every design issue. She was banging her head against the wall for years, because actually by the time it comes to consultation, people come at the end of the process and say, well, we can't do that now, it's too expensive, instead of designing it in from the very beginning. And that's visibly, that's what I felt in Copenhagen. The public spaces were for everybody, and they were a forethought, not an afterthought.
Anna, I'll be interested in your views on this actually, because I would, given that I did once work on the Olympic Park for 7 years, we introduced, the ODA first introduced an inclusive design standard, and that was then updated and moved forward by the LLDC, and I think it's been updated again since then, I think.
I'm not sure.
I mean, that I think was one of the first, I mean, this was now, when it was first introduced, this is a while ago now, but I mean, certainly it was one of the first occasions where I was certainly aware of an organisation that started as a forethought, thought, okay, we're going to be investing a lot in this place. Let's ensure that we achieve standards that are exemplary at the time. I mean, and obviously, you know, I was railing against regulation earlier, but I think there is a point at which sort of being purposeful about how you go about designing. I think a client, let's say like a Lendlease or an LLDC, it is quite helpful, I think, to have a very clear agenda set very early on so that all your designers know and understand where you're coming from, and they actively participate in a process to improve things. Certainly, I mean, I think that's certainly one way of going about kind of uplifting qualities, is to be clear.
To extend that, so at GDI Hub, we were born out of kind of the Paralympic legacy, and we still sit on the Olympic Park. And one of our founders, Ian McKinnon, he was involved in designing what is now West Ham Stadium for the Olympics and the Paralympics. And he was in charge of the inclusive parts of that design. And he says, you know, I think that if I had to choose a seat in this whole stadium, the best place to sit is where I put the wheelchair seats. Because so often when you're in a venue, the accessible seating is in the worst spot. And so he said, we're going to do something different. We're going to do something that isn't just the bare minimum standard, the bare minimum number of seats and place where it has to be. Instead, we're going to actually make it the best it could be, have more seats. We're going to have multiple disabled toilets, so you don't have to go from one end of the stadium to the other, depending on where your seats are. And that's just going beyond the bare minimum. It should be a no-brainer, but so often I complain about a building that maybe I'm working in or attending an event in, and they go, well, it's built to standards. And it's, yeah, I'm sure it is. It's still shit, frankly. You can do better than that. We can all do better than that. And so I think the best examples I've seen are going beyond the standards, don't just look at them, doing design with people, not just about them, not distanced from them, but with them, talk to them, give them agency, and get good at kind of those interactions with the people you're designing for. Because as a researcher and a disabled person, I've been on both ends. I've been a research participant and the researcher, and so I know what a good research interview session looks like. There are people who make me feel comfortable to say what I think, and there are people who don't. And so investing in that sort of knowledge, emotional skills to do your co-design and co-production. And when I say co-design and co-production, I don't just mean consultation. Those are very different things. And also with the Queen Elizabeth Olympic Park and the Paralympics, there was I can't remember the name of it, but a committee of disabled people from East London to oversee the project for developing the area who had veto power over every decision.
That was Built Environment Access Panel.
The Built Environment Access Panel. And that is something you so rarely see. I don't think I've ever seen it at other points, because in other cases, someone says, actually, you installing this feature makes the experience bad for me. I'm going to have to, circumvent all of these paths because you decided to put stairs here, And it doesn't matter that you said you hate it. They'll just say, well, we consulted disabled people about it. And nothing really changes sometimes. And compensate people for that co-production. Pay them. Even if it's a small project, I'm coaching some fashion design students through some adaptive design project now. And I said, I know you guys don't have resource to pay disabled people to talk to you about your designs, but probably a few of you know a disabled person. Maybe it's your grandmother, maybe it's a neighbor. Say, can I take you to lunch or can I buy you a coffee? and we can talk about this, there are small ways to do that in a way that's respectful and really joyful, to bring joy back into it. I think those of us who work in this sector are no longer fearful of it, if we ever were. We kind of take joy in the kind of messiness and complexity where we can, because we see it as good for our community, as building our community. And I think that can kind of take a lot of the fear and unpleasantness out of it.
Yeah, just to add, +1 for everything that Anna's just said. I think another way that you can make sure that people are really compensated is just looking at how you approach co-design or commissioning of expertise across your projects. So if you commission a web designer, you'd commission a lawyer. So commission a disabled persons organisation to do your engagement with the disabled community, or an organisation that comes from other communities to work with that community. We're fairly lucky that there are quite a lot of budgets swirling around, and people are commissioning external consultants. So are you building that consultation and engagement into your requests for proposals? Are you scoring on how much community engagement and real co-design is actually being done rather than consultation? And do you have disabled people with other protected characteristics on your team who can co-facilitate those discussions? The worst thing for me personally is going into a workshop as an individual citizen and starting to talk about something like spoon theory, and the facilitator just glazes over, or you have to spend 20 minutes going, sorry, what, spoons? What are you talking about? So it's a theory that people with energy-limiting chronic illness use to talk about our energy impairments. But if you haven't got that shared language on your team, you're not going to get the best out of the people that you're trying to work with anyway. And just on the, where have we seen innovation? Elizabeth Line, love it in London. Very quiet, very calm environments. But unfortunately, when they were thinking about step-free routes, they were thinking about wheelchair users only. So if you're doing a step-free interchange on the Lizzie line, be prepared to be late for your next meeting, guys, because it is a long old walk. So even there, again, just to echo what's already been said, those minimum provisions, those minimum standards of accessibility or safety or whatever it might be, should be your floor, not your ceiling. And we should always be striving to go one better than the last best thing that's been designed.
And the other thing about the Elizabeth line is no toilets.
My other favourite topic, yes. We need toilets on the Elizabeth line.
Yeah, and so I suppose then the question is, how do we ensure this conversation means that the infrastructure we use is developed and is changed by the people that use it? And have any of you seen a really good retrofit or a really good change of existing infrastructure led by user groups? What about in the audience? This is something that we need to work on, I think.
Oh, I have. Yeah, so I've only lived in this country for 2.5 years, and I find it really interesting coming from the US, where comparatively our infrastructure is not that old, how really, really old buildings in the UK do or do not adapt themselves to modern standards of disabled access. And so I was doing my touristy thing, and I went to Windsor Castle, and they stuck a lift in that old building. And then I went to Hampton Court Palace, older building, and they stuck a lift in there. And I think this also gets at this conflict that people get really worked up about between historic preservation and disabled access. And too often, when something goes wrong, the answer is, oh, well, you understand, it was built in 1912, and I'll go, oh, yes, before disabled people existed. I understand. And it wasn't built accessibly, and now we have to deal with that. But that's not just a blanket excuse of, okay, well, that's it then. There are ways to do it when the will is there. And again, I'll shout out Ian McKinnon from GDI Hub, who is really clever about finding respectful and innovative ways to make historic preservation and accessibility go hand in hand. So I think it's one of those things where so often this is just not a priority. And we don't want to say it's not a priority because that makes us feel guilty and like bad people. So instead we're going to say, oh, well, historic preservation, or oh, well, money, oh, well, space. And have we really interrogated whether that's actually true? I think very often not.
Okay, I'm going to come to the audience now. If there are any questions that you want to ask, please do. Maybe ponder your question, unless anybody's got one straight away. I'm going to ask about money then. How do we get investment into this sector? What does the panel think about ways that we're going to spur on investment?
I think I've got a gripe really than a solution. But I remember sitting when I was leader of Liverpool, our core cities meeting, talking about green investment. And central government weren't really helping with local government. Local government responsibility, you know, how much emissions they put out are about 25%, but are capable of really driving net zero change within cities. And when we're looking to the private sector, we wanted to work with the public sector to find a way of investing the things we need to do to reach net zero. I remember saying, but you want exactly the same reward and want the councils to take all the risk on a problem that is everybody's responsibility, not just the councils. And so I felt there was no pushback. Well, a tumbleweed went across the floor, actually. No one was prepared to say anything. So what we've done at Kindred when we co-designed around social investment, we asked people to pay back in social impact. Other people would call it grants. We called it, delivery, so paying back in social impact. And so there was an offer, can we pay back in reaching net zero targets, so private investors wouldn't just get the same return as they get everywhere else, but some of it we'd be rewarded for reaching those targets, and that never went anywhere either. But I think in terms of investment and money, there's lots of money about. I know that we're in austerity and cost of living and all those crises. There's lots of money about. It's people aren't prepared to move on the return that they get. And I think in some of the global problems that we have, or the bigger picture issues, we need to share responsibility.
Yeah, I mean, I would just add to that. In terms of investment, certainly starting as I do with large-scale regen master plans, then obviously you can choose to do things well and equitably, or you can choose to do things without that consideration in mind. Either way, you spend a lot of money. And probably if you design in a more equitable approach, both approach and outcome from day one, then your return on investment probably actually will be improved, because what you're doing is you're creating a more open and accessible, equitable environment in which you've got diversity, and therefore you've got resilience into the future. I mean, in the end, what you want to create is a part of a city which is going to have, it's going to be resilient to all the future shocks, and one of the best ways you can do that is to make it as inclusive and equitable as you possibly can. And Anna, just before this talk, we were talking about a building that's had to be retrofitted in order to accommodate a more accessible environment, and that cost an absolute fortune. Had it been done from day one, it would have been a lot cheaper to have done it. In fact, probably so achingly small, nobody really would have noticed it on the kind of the multiple spreadsheet. It was a big building. So it's kind of really a question about why do we do things so badly, rather than why don't we just do things well from day one? That's kind of, and then return on investment probably. Yeah. You've got an answer to that, have you, Joanne?
Well, no, I was just going to say representation. Is that why we do things so badly? Yeah. The people aren't represented who are making those decisions that affect a broader range of people.
Exactly, 100%.
I don't know if I have an answer for where do we find investment, how do we get more investment, but I'll tell a bit of a recent experience that might have an answer in it. I was invited to a day-long conference on inclusive climate investment. And, I do have quite a lot of knowledge about disabled people's particular considerations in climate change policies, mitigation and adaptation. That's a research area of mine. But I kind of said to one of my colleagues, why am I invited here? I don't know anything about investment. I'm not seeking investment. I can't offer it. And she looked at me and said, well, they don't know anything about disability. And that's why. And I said, okay, interesting, I guess. And she kind of said, well, that's why we're doing this, because they don't know anything about disability. You don't know anything about investment. And so we kind of need to get together and learn to speak one another's language so that they can start funding disability inclusive investment projects. And I was like, oh, okay, that's actually really clever and makes a lot of sense. And so I wonder about more of that, more about bringing people in, say housing investment, together with people in disability spaces, and just saying, like, go in a room together and talk to one another until you both start to make sense. There's a lot to be said for that, and I did learn a lot, and I think they did too, and then we kind of put our heads together about, okay, so for the people not in this room, how do we on the disability side start phrasing our proposals in a way that's going to make sense to you climate investment folks? So for instance, saying, you might think this is a really niche community, but actually 20% of people across the world are disabled, a bit higher if you believe some statistics, lower others. So this isn't a niche problem. It's actually huge, and you need to start investing in it, and that's going to get their brains going. And how do they phrase their calls for proposals, calls for investment, and say that this includes things geared towards disabled people. And so I think that if more of that was to happen, it would be really beneficial. And also I think I would like to see, and this is probably something that has to happen both inside the disability community and outside, we all need to get a bit less precious and fragile about being wrong. Because even when you're friends with people who are different than you are, which hopefully we all are, because that makes for a richer life, you're going to get things wrong because you don't have the same life experience. And so you need to get comfortable with someone just being like, actually, that was kind of insensitive when you said that. And you need to just be like, oh, sorry, okay, won't do it again. And there's a lot of fear, especially connected with disability and working with that community, and I understand it. But I do wish people would get used to the fact that they're going to get stuff wrong. They just need to get over it so we can get to the real work.
Just two quick things from me on that. Just don't want to repeat what anyone said, but I think one of the ways we can find the money and the time and the people resource to work on this is to look at what we're already prioritising and investing in. So when we're thinking about infrastructure projects, we prioritise health and safety. We may now prioritise sustainability, net zero. So how can we convince the power holders, the budget holders, to realise that nothing is going to be safe until it's also accessible, or it's safe for women and girls, or it's safe for other protected characteristic groups? Because that's then how you can say, okay, so you're willing to invest in safety, you're willing not to cut corners on safety, but do you realise that the way you're currently doing safety means that someone can't get out of a station when the lift's not working, so they could be trapped on the platform, or whatever it might be. So if it's not accessible for everyone, it's not safe for everyone. And then on the flip side, thinking more about kind of inclusive funding, there are a myriad of competitions, so Innovate UK, UKRI, people like that who do great kind of sprint competitions for businesses. But I think we really need to look at how they are designed and how they're marketed and how they're promoted. So I don't want to name any names, but there's one that's live at the moment which just isn't designed for kind of community-led proposals. It funds 3 months in arrears, so you've got to have the startup seed funding to even get your project off the ground. If we've got money, brilliant, and as we've heard, there is a bit of money floating around, but is the way that we're even designing these competitions, making accessibility a point of competitive advantage, rather than saying all of these bids should be accessible from day one. So if we are the people in the room who hold those pots of money, think about who's it going to, what does your data show it's going to in terms of the diversity of the people who are receiving it, and what can you do to change that?
Great. So I think I'm being looked at for time. So what I'm going to do is ask the panel. I'm just really sorry that questions will have to try and grab and have a conversation in the foyer. But just ask the panel, what's the big thing that you want people in this room to leave with from this conversation?
It can be done. I know we weren't great in coming up with examples. It can be done, especially when people feel included. I take Anna's point about, people getting better. Racism is often viewed as toxic and very sensitive. I get what you're saying there. Also very tired of consultation and engagement and being ignored and just not being listened to. So there is a lot of fear to get over to make people included. You will get it wrong. You will upset some people, won't upset others so much. But actually the reward is huge. And Selina and I had this conversation online. I grew up in an estate where crime was designed in. And I only knew that when crime was designed out, and I could see that crime was designed out. So dark alleyways, someone could attack somebody and they could be like a mile down the road undercover without being seen. That's a housing estate I grew up in that wasn't safe for women. And I just having an awareness, especially if you're not from a minority community. So there's a woman on TikTok, a guilty pleasure of mine, watching TikTok, but she travels across London, a black woman, late at night in her early 20s, and this guy was showing her recording because he was gobsmacked that she just had to put up with so much hassle from men. So there was complete lack of awareness that even went on. So I think, having that kind of, intrigue and wanting to know and learn will get you there. You will make mistakes, but it can be done.
Just echo that really. I think don't be afraid to acknowledge what you don't know. There's no harm in asking others who have got more lived experience than you have. And we're always happy to share kind of our expertise and our experience if you're willing to pay for it.
Yes, okay. I think from my perspective, it would be a question of just having the humility to listen, and really great advice from everyone around just being prepared to, accept maybe you will get things wrong, but start the conversation anyway. And creating an equitable place for society doesn't happen out there, other people, it's us. So that would be my thought.
Yeah, I think mine is that, we discussed a lot of really interesting examples on the panel, but most of you will still go away being like, I'm still not sure exactly what I can do in whatever my sector is, whatever my day job is with disability inclusion. And that's fine. There are a ton of people who will be very happy to tell you what to do. And you just need to seek them out. There's a lot of fantastic consultants and people like that working in this sphere. Particularly, I'll shout out Emily with the gorgeous pink hair, who's an amazing accessibility consultant. And so there are ways to do this. Don't let, I don't know what to do, be an excuse.
Can I say one last thing, if you don't mind? So thank you so much. I think it's really, really important to say that where I was really uncomfortable in that conversation, and there are two moments where I think I'm going to walk away and sit with my discomfort. The first is, this is an organisation, Connected Places Catapult, that gives out a lot of funding, and I take that point, Carolyn, that we need to look at how we design those funding competitions to bring in as wide a range of voices. And the second is, Anna, where you challenged us on, are we the right people in the room to be having that conversation about investment? So I suppose then the ask is, we need to be going out and having that conversation. There's lots of people in this building who do know quite a lot about investment, but know very, very little about how to listen to the people who use transport and cities in their lives. So please, can we go out and have conversations with them and have conversations with the panel who are all here, and thank you very much.
Great.
For joining us.
Thank you very much.